What if healing after loss isn't about finding closure, but learning how to carry love and grief together? In this episode of Not Just a Story, I speak with Neal, co-founder of the Endurant movement and creator of the Endurant Way. After Neal's son Anthony died by suicide, Neal came face to face with what he now calls the closure lie, the belief that healing means getting over it, moving on, and somehow leaving the person you lost behind. Neal shares the lived experience that shaped his framework for post-traumatic growth, the ongoing spiritual connection he feels with Anthony, and what it has meant to carry his son with him rather than try to move past him. This is a deeply personal conversation about grief, love, purpose, and the possibility that pain and joy can exist side by side.
Welcome to Not Just a Story with Rose Davidson, where lived experience becomes meaning and stories create impact.
Hello, welcome to Not Just a Story with Rose Davidson. I'm your host today, Rose Davidson, and my guest today is Neal. And Neal is going to be chatting with us about the closure lie and what carrying loss with purpose really does look like. Neal and his wife Samara are the co-founders of the Endurant movement. Neal is the creator of the Endurant Way, a framework for post-traumatic growth born from the loss of his son Anthony. He is a speaker, storyteller, and guide. He's not a clinician. He works from lived experience rather than through theory. After Anthony's death, Neal discovered that healing was never about closure. It was about learning to carry loss with purpose. Through his framework and his ongoing spiritual connection to Anthony, Neal helps people move from surviving to living, showing audiences that pain and purpose, grief and joy can coexist. He is currently writing a book on the Endurant Way. Neal, welcome to Not Just a Story. It's a very great pleasure to meet you.
Likewise, and it's an honor and privilege to be here and have this conversation together.
Yeah, firstly, just let me say I'm sorry for your loss. I know that losing a child must be quite devastating. I've not had that experience, but I can imagine how devastating it could be.
It is indeed, and thank you for that. I appreciate that and grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation so that it may help others who are, faced with significant loss as well.
Yeah, and I think losing a loved one through suicide can leave a lot of questions. Did I do enough? Why didn't I see the signs? How did you deal with that?
Great question. So that was, and in many ways is still all true for me. And, I came to learn some things after that, also would have made a difference and also contributes to the ongoing surfacing of the feelings of regret. But, first thing I'd love to share about Anthony was he was an amazing child and young man, just the love of our life. And, Anthony was diagnosed at 7 with high functioning autism. And that started a unique journey for us as his parents. And we were capable and on that journey with him. And there were many things that we were made aware of that to anticipate as Anthony grew up. For instance, many with that diagnosis will, have a difficult time making friends or maybe more susceptible to bullying. Now, I feel so blessed and fortunate that wasn't Anthony's case. He had an abundance of friends, due in large part potentially to his masking his diagnosis. But sadly, what we came to learn after Anthony's passing was that kids with his diagnosis between the ages of 12 and 18 are nearly 30% more likely to die by suicide, and they're the number one group for completion. And the journey was already hard enough, because Anthony fell into and was diagnosed with depression in 2020. And that started a 2-year journey for us where we were aware of his suicidal ideation, and we did everything we possibly could to help him. But the challenge was, and still is, and that's why my wife and I established the Endurant Movement nonprofit, is that at least here in the United States, in the world of autism, there is no experience or training or preparation for the mental health aspects that come later and the potentiality for suicide. And then our experience for 2 years in the mental health world, seeking help, inpatient, outpatient, and otherwise, was despite our communicating with them about his neurodiversity, most of what we got back was like, listen, there's nothing special for this. And so that became our purpose and our life's work. The Endurant Movement exists so no child, no youth, neurodiverse or otherwise, is left so unseen and understood that they may take their life. All that being said is, your question is a very tough one to answer. I mean, we saw the signs, we had the conversations, we sought all the help we could get. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the help that we found, that we became to understand later, better ways and some things that are being done mostly in Europe, but in some pockets on the East Coast, are helping kids. But most of the things that we did, many of them didn't not only didn't help Ant, but Ant was his nickname, by the way, but actually contributed to his hopelessness, especially like inpatient services, the bright lights, the rooms with no windows, medications for him created more ideation. So we saw all the signs. We had open dialogue with him. Anthony was so aware of his suicidal ideation that he was a junior. He had intentions for his senior project to be focused on suicide awareness, more specifically destigmatizing the word suicide. He felt that was really part of the problem, the stigma surrounded by it. And that was his hopes and wishes. And yet, despite all that openness and the efforts and the bouts of depression and suicidality, and one of his coping mechanisms was to go for a walk and get fresh air. And all the previous times that he did that, he came back. And sadly, on this particular night, when that was his method to help himself to go on a walk, he must have got in a mixed up state and wound up making a different decision and didn't come home. So all that to say is, saw the signs, aware of the signs. And, I heard Martin Short share this, and it really resonated with me. I think in many ways, whether or not suicide is preventable or not, we must treat it as though it is, and that the outcome is a must to reduce suicide prevention entirely. But what Martin shared short is mental health is a disease, and much like cancer, it's sometimes terminal. And I think while I would trade all of it and do anything for one more shot to save Ant's life, because I believe I could, I also believed it before, and I think in some cases just may not be preventable.
Yeah, I think sometimes the mental health that's available, mental health assistance that's available out there, don't always understand ideation. They you mentioned about, I mean, from my understanding, autistic people don't like bright lights. I don't like a lot of noise. So, in that way, the mental health people failed Anthony. And you're quite right. Even if you don't have autism, sometimes it's things that these practitioners don't think about, that can bring about, more harm to the patient than what they went in with. And I think that there's got to be a relook and a rethink about how they deal with people that have got chronic depression and have ideation. From my experience, because I was on that road a couple of years ago, and I was very thankful that I received the help that I needed to overcome that. But a lot of people don't have that benefit, and sometimes they don't have the thought pattern to go and seek the help that they need. So, how can we, change and bring about the change that is required for people to go and seek help? How can we make them see that they need the help that so desperately need?
It's such a powerful question, and I can only speak to my lived experience, because even though Anthony initially didn't share his suicidal ideation with us, it was we're so grateful he confided in a dear best friend about his thoughts, and his friend shared with his mother that Anthony had shared this with him. And so that opened the doorway to us. And at first, expectedly, as a teenager, he was upset that his buddy broke his confidence, but he understood. And again, we had the journey where we were all aware of it and trying to work through this. But to answer your question, at least from the lens of my experience, and it could apply to neurotypical as well, but as it relates to youth on the autism spectrum, the work that's being done to save these kids' lives is so simple and powerful. For example, here the diagnosis is acronym is ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder, much like ADHD. All of these diagnoses seem to end in disorder. And so when we're labeling our children, especially as having a disorder, right away we're labeling them as if something's wrong. And so they have this disorder, and they're going in and having services that they need so that they can overcome this disorder and be normal. And it's just mind-blowing how simple that was, and yet how the years that I was going through it with my wife and son, we just accepted it as such and talked about it that way. And sadly, what happens in the current environment for autism is they're training the children to learn to fit in, to learn to, even though they think differently, behave differently, react differently to emotions, they're being trained to pick up on cues and things to better fit in. But the work that's being done in the United Kingdom, and some great work that's being done by a psychiatrist who's on our board, Dr. Gupta, is quite simple. He's meeting with these kids with these diagnoses, and the very first thing is he's telling them, we're going to drop the D. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't have a disorder. There's nothing wrong with you. You have autism, but much like I have brown eyes and my wife has green eyes, it's just a difference. You have autism. Another friend of yours may be neurotypical. Another friend of yours may have a different flavor of neurodiversity, but help people understand they're not their diagnosis, and there's certainly nothing wrong with them. So just kind of removing that label and helping them understand it's a difference like hair color or eye color, or, you're Australian, I'm Italian American. It's just those kind of differences. And then the second thing that they're doing is helping these kids find their tribe, find their community, and find their superhero. So rather than trying to fit in with normal and overcome their disorder, find their tribe of folks who have like interests, and also find a superhero. So for a lot of kids with my son's diagnosis, their superhero may be somebody like Elon Musk, right? Or, where mine might be a sports figure or a rock star or something like that. helping them find their superhero, helping them find their tribe. And then very important with the autism diagnosis is this idea of masking and camouflaging. See, because over the years, the impact and the stacking of all the things that Anthony had to think about and do to fit in was masking who he really was. And you could see, especially in his teenage years, the physical and emotional toll that took on him. And ultimately, when he was in his deep depressions and that particular night, the exhaustion was just inexplicable. And so, I imagine in many ways that could be spread across for anyone who might be feeling suicidal ideation is some sense of belonging, feeling a part of, though I feel uncomfortable and certainly don't want to generalize it. But that was our experience. And then this is what we've come to learn. And that's why we feel almost a moral obligation to spread this awareness so that other families might have an opportunity to learn some of these things and maybe save their child's life.
Yeah, and you're right. It is a balancing act between being intrusive into their world and holding space for them when you know that they have a problem. And putting labels on people is something that we're all guilty of doing in some way, shape, or form. So I don't, I don't really think that putting labels on a diagnosis is a benefit to anybody. And I think that I think the health practitioners need to learn that putting labels on a diagnosis can be harmful.
Agreed.
Anyway, tell me a little bit about your methodology and about your book.
Yes, sure. Thank you. What a great question. So I'm really grateful we got to talk about Anthony and the diagnosis and suicidality, because that is the important and most important work is anything we could do to save these lives. Now, as part of that experience of profound and inexplicable loss, I went through a transformative experience where I, through the grace of God, spirit, universe, whatever you want to call it, was able to transmute my pain, my suffering into purpose. And before I get into sort of the framework and the book, I think I'd really love to share a little bit about that, because the Endurant Way was built so that adults carrying tremendous loss who can't see a way forward or have decided they don't want their loss to define them moving forward, are struggling. And so for me, and my wife too, we were really fortunate in that, ultimately for Anthony, a passerby found him and he was revived by a first responder, and he had significant brain injuries, but he was hospitalized in Rady's Children's Hospital for 9 weeks. And these 9 weeks were extraordinary. I don't think I'd be here with you today if we didn't have that time with him. The loving care of the doctors and nurses at Rady's was extraordinary. The room that was made available to us across the street at the Ronald McDonald House so that we could be with him day and night for 9 weeks was extraordinary. But our community reached out and poured themselves into us. A dear friend asked if she could hold a all faiths welcome prayer circle that first night over Zoom, and 75 people, many of whom we didn't know, showed up and prayed over Anthony and prayed over our family. And initially, some of his recovery was miraculous, but over the course of the next 9 Sundays, a new person raised their hand each week to lead this prayer circle. And it was so fascinating because people came from all walks of life and faiths and beliefs and stuff that outside that experience might find them in conflict. Um, in this particular room, it was all love. So whether someone shared that Jesus died on the cross so that Anthony could, or in the Zohar, it is believed this happened because, or in the Buddhist tradition, we believe, or for a non-believer, what was powerful, Rose, is the receipt, even though it was articulated through the lens of their belief or religion, the receipt to my family and me and Anthony was pure love and light. And somehow, some way that just lifted us up where suffering is incapacitation, where you can't move and you're just paralyzed by the trauma. And believe me, it was traumatic. Somehow we were lifted up and we started to share our journey. And, ultimately after Anthony's passing was encouraged to continue to share. And what I found, a friend shared with me was this concept of post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is the equal and opposite to post-traumatic stress disorder. So if we have so much trauma and we don't have an avenue to experience that trauma and move through it, and it becomes chronic, now we have post-traumatic stress disorder. But post-traumatic growth says if we can find some purpose, some meaning that's just a little bit greater than our pain or suffering, we'll be compelled into action. And there's an opportunity to grow in the most extraordinary ways. And I really found that because that ended up being my experience. And what does all that mean specifically? I think as I start to share with you about the closure lie, I think the expected path is you've got a traumatic loss, you have grief, this myth of some healing process with closure, and no disrespect to Kubler-Ross, each of those 5 steps of grief do happen, but they keep happening. So there's not some arrival destination, whether you go through these steps, now you've arrived and you're healed and closed. But what I found is by setting that down, I think the idea of closure is doing people a disservice because now on top of their grief and trauma, if they're not healing or reaching this magic nirvana, now they're frustrated and wondering what's wrong with them. But we're through the grace of God and experience, my experience is this. My threshold for pain was here. This happened when I was 49 and a half. The sum total of adversity in my life was pretty breast. My parents separated for a couple of years in high school. I lost my best friend to cancer, difficult things, and I had some challenges, but the sum total of my life's challenges didn't equate to what I'm going through now. But my love for life, humans, people, I was described by a dear friend as someone who squeezes every ounce of love and joy out of an experience. So I'm here. My baseline for pain is here. Well, now, after this experience, I have a new floor for pain, trauma, and yes, the pain is unimaginable. I could never even describe it to you. You couldn't try it on. It's inexplicable. But what's fascinating is so too now is the equal and opposite opportunity to experience joy, love, connection, intimacy. So now I've got, instead of having this narrow, mostly joyous life, I've got this wide spectrum of unimaginable pain, but so too unimaginable joy. And so it's my lived experience that this idea of both and, that we can carry the duality of emotions, extraordinary levels of pain, but instead of trying to get rid of it or get through it, accept that it's there, feel it, but also feel the joy, feel the love, feel the appreciation for life. And so I think where people suffer is their trauma and their pain, pulls them here, but so does the belief that the joy that's available to them must come with it. But when in fact, the possibility exists to have both. So that's been my lived experience. This is why I feel so called to help other adults have this experience. And listen, I'm only 2 years in, and there is no there, but I want to share and help people understand that this too is available to them. And yes, the life that I hoped for, dreamed of, and even expected got blown to bits, but my destiny is still available and being written. And if you believe like I do, the moment I reunite with Anthony, it's not going to feel like a moment has passed. So why would I waste the time that I have left here? I'd rather have that shared moment with him and celebrate, as opposed to us both looking back with regret that even though it might seem reasonable that I suffer the rest of my life from this unimaginable loss.
Yeah, I agree. I lost my mother last year, and although been estranged for a number of years, her loss and her passing really hit me a lot harder than I thought. And I kept asking about grief, and how long does it last for? And there's no timeline. It's there's just no timeline. There's no and you're right. There's no healing. It's not linear. And you can feel all right one day, and then the next day you might feel like total crap because those feelings keep reawakening themselves. So, but in the meantime, while you're feeling this awful grief, there is other things that you're right. There is joy at the other end of it. You've still got life, and you can find the joy in. For me, it's nature. I love nature. I love just a beautiful flower, or a cute little bird, or a cat doing something silly, or things like that. And they're joyful things. It's just the little things that you need to be mindful of and take notice of, and they will help you on your journey of your grief. That's what I found anyway.
I'm so glad that you shared that, because oftentimes I'll get asked the question, well, but what if your mind isn't there? You haven't made the choice that this possibility is available to you. And it's so much of what you shared. Nature is just magic. Like if you can get present with your eyes and your senses, and see the bird, experience the insects, whatever it may be. For me, as it relates to nature, it's the grounding in. I live near the ocean, so the sand is really healing for me, but it could also be grass or dirt. In the winter, I enjoy the elevation of the mountains and the oxygen. For others, it could be comedy, music, but finding something where you remember the experiences of joy in some way, that'll create the pinhole of possibility. And if you could experience that simultaneously with that pain that you're feeling, you'll start to develop that capability or that muscle to experience that duality of emotion.
100%. No, I totally agree with that. Now, and you and I have both lived through that feeling of the grief and the joy. So, I think if people can find that, and it's not always easy because they're blinded by the grief, and sometimes it's all consuming, but you've got to just find that little window somewhere that can be helpful. Now, tell me a little bit now about your book, Anthony. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so basically, I'm writing a book, and I'm early on in it, but the premises that I want to create is, do we ever really have it all, right? And I want to not just share Anthony's story, but share and understand the journey of struggle to transformation. And in a nutshell, the premise of the book is also the same as the present premise of the Endurant Way framework. And I'm going to go through all the steps per se, because it's very technical and tactical, but the belief, the hoped for outcome is what I shared a few minutes ago. If somebody can find purpose that's just a little bit greater than their pain, they'll be compelled into action. Now, people will say to me sometimes who are really struggling and suffering, it's in some way, shape, or form. That's easy for you to say because your purpose hits you over the head. I mean, through synchronicity, 2 weeks after Anthony's passing, a social media acquaintance, someone that I didn't even really know, reached out and shared with me the statistic that I shared with you earlier. And so immediately it was like 30%. That's a third of the population. Like, for me, that purpose like came through like that, and it became a moral obligation. I didn't want any other kids or parents to suffer. So yes, I was fortunate with it. But what I've come to believe is a real starting point is this idea of that so many of us have heard, is that grief is love that has no place to go. And I believe that's half true. See, because yes, grief, the amount of grief that we feel is in direct correlation to the love we have for that person who's no longer physically here. So there's all this love and there's this capacity. And the myth again of the closure is somehow we'll work through that and that will just dissipate, or we could pray it away to them or whatever. But my lived experience and the best way to find purpose is to understand the potentiality of the gift that love still exists. And so for me as a parent, that love is far reaching and wide, and there's so much of it. And I'm only stuck and suffering if I don't place it somewhere. So the possibility to find purpose is to accept that, yes, grief is love that exists for that person, but the Satan's ending that has nowhere to go is also a myth. There's plenty of places for it to go. Pour it into a loved one, pour it into a friend, volunteer. When you're giving in service, your mind takes you away from your suffering to help the other. And you say to yourself, oh, I can't help anyone. I'm suffering. I'm incapacitated. Well, yeah, you're only incapacitated because that love that you possess is stuck. So find that place for it. And so that's the seed or genesis of the breakthrough that I'm wanting to help people find, creating community for maybe folks who weren't blessed in the way my family and I was, with so many pouring themselves into them, or people who want to not suffer, but the idea of purpose is just not even in the same universe, to help them understand the capacity is there because you have the love. And there are things like you shared, like nature, music, comedy. If we could just find one moment of joy, one experience that we could start to stack, we can grow in love. And so that's the purpose of the work. And if you feel like you're struggling and you don't have a community, communities aren't like found, communities are built. So you just need to find one other person and share vulnerably what you're going through and see what comes back and build from there. So the book is a personal journey for me to get it out, and I've been encouraged to share the story because it might help others. I really want to get down to the work and help people find community, help people find a place for all that love that they feel, and to carry both grief and joy and love simultaneously and see what happens, see what shows up.
Lovely. I love that. I think it's such a noble cause, Neal. I think and it will go a long way. I'm sure that, and the world needs a lot more of what you're giving. I think it's something that's sadly lacking.
It is, and thanks to you, there are rooms and places where we can spread this awareness. So I would say the same to you. The world needs more of what you're giving, and creating this room for us to amplify and make people aware of what's possible, as opposed to suffering in silence. I mean, I much prefer it in person, and where we can touch and feel each other, and, in a hugging, connected kind of way. But that you and I could share a room, untold thousands of miles apart, your morning, my evening, and maybe one person will benefit from this, is extraordinary.
Absolutely. And I think My journey on what I'm doing now started because of the grief of losing my mum and the grief of, ending my marriage. And I thought, well, I'm a heart-centered person and I want to help other people be able to share their stories, much like I couldn't share mine for a very long time. So I'm glad that you acknowledge that, that I'm giving back to the world that has treated me not so well on many occasions, but I've found my way through, and I think that's important.
It's very important. I honor you for it, and I'm sorry the world has treated you in the way that it has, and the work that you're doing is extraordinary. I've researched you. I've had a listen, and without question, you're impacting and saving lives,
Oh,
whether you know
thank
it or
you.
not.
Thank you so much. Neal, it has been an absolute pleasure. If you want to reach out to Neal, please do so. You can find him. Where can we find you, Neal?
The easiest way is at theendurantway.com. So endurantway.com or nealtricarico.com, but that's a mouthful. Hopefully you'll include those in the show notes. And if you're curious about the nonprofit or wanting to help in any way, volunteering, resources, money, that is theendurantmovement.com.
Wonderful. So reach out to Neal if you feel that you have something that you can offer him. I will say goodbye for now, and it's been lovely meeting you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Rose. What a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Not Just a Story with Rose Davidson. If something in this episode stayed with you, you're invited to reflect on your own story, in your own way, in your own time. And if you feel ready, you can share your story through the Impactful Voice Project at rosedavidson.com.au. This is a space where lived experience is honored and stories are shared with care. Until next time, your story matters.